My name is Stacia Deshishku. I am the Executive Vice President of ABC News. Sexism in journalism. You know, the interesting thing is today there are more women coming out of journalism schools than there are men. That wasn't always the case. For years, this was a male-dominated industry, a white male-dominated industry. People tend to hire people who look and act like them. So when people are pulling that next person up, mentoring and promoting, for a long time, women weren't taken seriously. I mean, even in the beginning part of the White House press corps, the women were only allowed to cover the First Lady. They weren't allowed to actually cover the president. Thank goodness those days are gone, but it took a long time. You know, when I first started, women were limited in the newsroom. Even in the business part, they took care of the female parts, which were HR, PR. You never had women as the president of the news division, as the executive producer of the news division. You didn't have them as the CFO or your lead of finance. Those were all men's jobs. As women began to move up, they did something. They hired people who looked like them. Now I really believe that the newsrooms are really diverse. CNN used to have a logo. It was said, "We are who we air who we are." That was really important because they wanted the people on air to represent the same people who were in the newsroom and the same people in the communities that they covered. And for a long time, they weren't there. And so once you start putting that as your true north, you'll go find those people. The president, who I served under, who's just recently left ABC News, was the first African-American woman, the first African-American president of a news division, and a woman. And it was really important for her to hire executives who represented everyone. And so her two executive vice presidents, one was African-American male, and the other is me. And then, you know, as you begin to go down through the organization, it is much more diverse. But for many years, sexism was there, and it was, get me a coffee, we had something we used to call the fax machine, clear out the fax machine, Xerox this for me. The girls did the girl jobs, and the guys got to go hang out with the anchors. For years, we would go on executive retreats, and you'd go on an executive retreat, and there would be two options. You could eat, for time off, you could go play golf, or you could go get a massage. Well, the massage was meant for the women, and the golf was meant for the men. But the problem was the conversations and the really getting to know you was happening at those offsites. Finally, as the women, we were like, no more massage trips and no more golf trips. Let's go deep sea fishing, all of us together, or something like that, something that, you know, really everyone could experience, because unfair advantages were happening at those. And it took women having a seat at the table to actually stop a lot of that. I think about it all the time. I think about it when I look out at the assignment desk, what does it look like? I think about it when I see who's in the executive producing positions for all the shows. We have at ABC News the most diverse group of executive producers. It shows in what we air, but that matters in who your cameramen and camerawomen are, who the editors are, because they are going to find people who look like them. And that bias can be in race, it can be age, it can be physical disability, it can be, you know, heavy versus skinny. All that bias is in there, and so the more people that you can have that cover every community in those editorial decision-making positions, you're going to get the best journalism that you can get. And you're going to reduce the isms. Because when I first got to ABC News Radio, it was full of sexism, ageism, cronyism, racism. The isms were alive and well. That was part of the reason they brought me in there, because they know I am a zero tolerance for any of that. And I was going to make sure that we knock that out. One of the ways that it played out for me was that I was often the only woman on a shoot. There would be a male correspondent, a male cameraman, a male editor, and a male, maybe a satellite truck engineer, and me. And the producer in those positions is actually the boss. That's why, actually, I never wanted to be on TV. When I looked around the newsroom and I saw the people who were in charge, I was like, ooh, the bossy one, that's me. And they were always the producer. And so I thought, okay, that's the job for me. But when you're out there, now you've got to have these men who are typically a lot older, listening to you. And so I had to fake it until I made it for a lot of the time, especially in the very beginning. I'm lucky that I have a big personality. I have a big voice. I could also give it as good as I got. But back in the day, I was covering a lot of hurricanes. And again, the only woman. You'd go back to your hotel and there'd be no power. Power's out in the town. The only people in town are first responders and journalists and people who run, what do you call them? The ladies' clubs, strip clubs. You know who always has electricity, beer, and water? Strip clubs. So at night, after the shoot was over, I could go back to my hotel room where there was no power. My lock on my door didn't work. It's completely dark. And all the men that I was traveling with were at the place with the beer and the water and the electricity. And so I had to make a decision. Was I going to go with them and be safe, but be uncomfortable? The first couple of years I did. I made that choice because I didn't think I had the authority to say, guys, we're not doing that. Eventually, I came into my own and I got my voice and I said, guys, we're not doing that. You can go buy some of that beer, but we're going to bring it back to the room and we're all going to hang out here together. We've got plenty of flashlights, plenty of ice, and we'll sit here and we'll all be together. It takes owning your voice to do that. And guess what? When I said it, they didn't have a problem. They were like, oh, okay, fine. I just didn't know that I could stand up for myself. And so now I'm constantly aware of that when I send women into the field. I want to make sure that the team is balanced because you're going to need somebody else who's got your back to say, I don't want to do this, or I don't feel comfortable with this, or I think maybe that's crossing the line. You can't be the only one standing up. Bias is sometimes obvious. More times than not, it becomes less obvious. What we really talk about a lot in our newsrooms, and it's so important to talk about it, is having the ability to stand up, put your hand up and say, I think there's bias in this, and not feel afraid. When you can have those open conversations like you should be having in your classes now, you should be able to bring that into your newsroom. And bias can be picked up by the least experienced, the youngest person in the room, or by the most experienced. It came to bear recently during when the struggle in Israel happened. That was a personal story for a lot of employees, Muslim employees and Jewish employees. It was a place where we were telling a story and we had to be really careful about how we talked about terrorism, how we talked about victims. And that's a story that's out here, and we should be able to intellectually separate ourselves from it. But people were in the newsroom, and it meant something to them personally. They had to step back from it a little. But we needed both sides to help us understand the story. We brought in at ABC an organization out of Columbia University that helped us talk about trauma in the newsroom and how to talk about it. Because we really can't identify it until we can talk about it. And people were feeling like they didn't want to be on the wrong side of any topic. They didn't want to say the wrong word. We're covering stuff that's happening at universities, and we're thinking, oh, they're in the middle of it. What's happening at the universities is happening in our newsrooms. And we're trying to cover these stories. We had to step back. We had to question ourselves, but we had to give each other the grace to question each other. And I think that really helped. And we sat down and we talked about it in small groups. We had breakout sessions about it. We had, bosses who said, I don't think I have the tools to cover this story and keep my employees emotionally safe. And so we had to bring in tools for them. It was a really unique story. But, bias happens all the time. My goodness. 2016, this is an interesting thing. 2016, when Donald Trump first started running for president, we did not take him seriously at all. We weren't far from him being, coming off of The Apprentice. He was funny. He was willing to say things that nobody said. But one of the interesting things that happened was he decided every morning to call in to the morning shows. He called into CNN, he called into Good Morning America, he called in the Today Show. He would just be on the phone. Typically, we would say, no, if you're going to have an interview with us, you have to be on the set. If you're running for president, you need to be on the set. But nobody took him seriously. There was that. And Hillary Clinton didn't want to wake up early and do her hair and makeup. And that is the true fact. And so she wasn't getting up and doing the morning shows. And so he owned the airwaves. In journalism, we have all looked back at that year and said, what did we do wrong? And this was one of them. Giving airtime to somebody that we didn't take seriously, because then it got out of balance. People got comfortable with the jokes and things that weren't true being said because we didn't take it seriously. I mean, here we just had, ABC was the host of the most recent presidential debate, and the ABC anchors got a lot of flack for fact-checking. That's our job. That's our job. And if we don't call out those facts, and people were like, well, they only fact-checked Kamala Harris once and Donald Trump 30 times. Well, Donald Trump said 30 times things that were incorrect. Kamala said a few more things, and they probably, should have, but they were prepared for his because we do a lot of research. We know kind of the questions that we're going to ask and typically what the answers are going to be, and so we've done research on what is the right answer, what's the wrong answer, and on hers, we needed to be a little more prepared. The next debate, if there is a next debate, the journalists will be more prepared to really make sure that they're holding Kamala Harris's feet to the fire as much as Donald Trump's. Has the TV broadcast media declined ethically? You know what? I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. When I first got into broadcast journalism, at the networks, there wasn't a group called Standards, the Standards and Practices. We have standards and ethics departments at each of the networks now that approve scripts that have any allegation of wrongdoing. They are doing the research to make sure that the facts have been checked, that the ethics have been checked. But the standards and practices departments came out of, actually, CNN. There was a story back in the 90s. It was called Tailhook. There were Navy aviators, and they were having conventions where they would have women run down the hallway and they would grope them. Allegations of wrongdoing that didn't have the legal department looking at them, didn't have, not just are we going to get sued if we say this, but are we ethically covering it properly? Then we got into coverage of President Bush's military record. And again, this is President Bush, number 2, his military record. CNN got into a lot of trouble by not fact-checking everything that it was reporting. That kind of sent everybody into, oh my goodness. ABC hit it when they started paying for photos. They called it licensing photos, but they were paying for the photos of a young girl who was murdered by her mother. Her mother sold the pictures to ABC to use in the stories that we were telling. But the industry said, but you're giving money to the person who's killed her daughter. That's not ethical. And ABC had to stand back and say, oh my God, we've always done this practice. Everybody does this practice. We pay in order to use so that we can have the rights to use the pictures. But when you're paying the person who's been accused of the crime, maybe that's not the best thing. And so each of the networks have had these ethical questions, and they've set up departments now whose entire job is to make sure that we hold that line. Our legal department can't tell us whether to air or not air a piece. They can tell us what our the chance that we might legally get sued, but they can't say yes or no. Our standards department absolutely can say yes or no. That ethics is most important, because if people can't trust what we're saying, what else do we have? People ask me all the time, do I need a journalism degree to be a journalist? And I typically say, it's great if you can get one, but not all schools have journalism classes or journalism departments. And typically you don't do a story on journalism. You're going to do a story on politics. You're going to do a story on history. You're going to do a story on science. Get a degree in one of those. But make sure you take writing classes, because you're going to write. Even though I thought, I'm going to be a broadcast journalist, I didn't know I was going to have to write the text article for the website, because websites didn't exist back then. I'm going to have to write a script. It didn't occur to me. So take a writing class and take an ethics class. Journalism ethics classes are the most important classes that you're going to take. If you don't have a journalism department, find that class at some university that's near you and take it, because that is the thing that's going to trip you up. We're going to teach you how to shoot. We're going to teach you how to edit. We're going to teach you how to cut pictures. We're going to teach our way. But what we're probably not going to teach you is the ethics. We're going to expect you to know it. So walk in with that. It's the most powerful thing, and it is what will give you the confidence to cover stories and know that you are educating people, that you're giving them the truth, and that you are staying on the right side of the ethics.